You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
It's just another Manic Monday here on the Unscripted Ohio Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Lamb. We are presented by Buckeye Grove, and we are here to talk about the tragedy that happened Saturday night. Saturday was just, I don't even know how to describe it, but you know what happened in West Lafayette. I'm here with my cohorts here for our Monday recap, Kirk Barton and Ross. And guys, I don't even know where we would begin on a show like this. But at first I will ask, how your weekend has gone otherwise. Kirk, I'll start with you.
It's been great. It's every day that I get to interact with people on the board and help people out. I helped out one of our board members is in Vegas, and I was able to get him in at STK, and my crew took care of him. And so it's not all bad in life. And the best part is I'm not in the staff room right now with Coach Meyer, so life is good. And
Ross, you've been hearing the joyful screams of the kids. There is no joy in Mudville here for Ohio State fans, but the little kids, it must be great to be naive and ignorant right now, right?
That's right. Just enjoying the zoo with the kids. I'd probably rather be at SDK, but once upon a time in my life, but now hitting up the Sunday morning zoo instead.
So
I like it.
Let's start with the obvious. I mean, this was in some ways a repeat of Iowa City from 2017. It was a 49-20 result. I think if somebody had come to us and said, "Hey, Ohio State's going to lose this week," I don't think any of us would have necessarily been shocked by that. Kirk, I know you were on edge about this game, and you said so last week. And Ohio State is 3-4 in West Lafayette, dating back to 2001. So there are elements. Certainly we've talked about so many parts of this team that we would not have been shocked if Ohio State lost. But if somebody had come and said the final score would be 49-20, I would have put money down that Ohio State won by that margin. But it wasn't to be, and instead the issues we've seen with this team have come to roost. Kirk, let's start with you. What, in your opinion, were the biggest issues and the takeaways that caused this crazy result?
Well, I just think that we have a major issue with our lack of commitment to the running game. Our offensive line has been, I would say, average at best, and we've been fortunate that we haven't played any teams that could take advantage of our somewhat lackluster defense. And we run into Purdue, and Purdue's always been a team that's been kind of a nightmare for us. If you go back to like 2012, that was the Kenny Guyton game where we're in overtime and we're undefeated, and we almost lost at home to Purdue. Like K'Wan Short knocked Braxton Miller out of the game, and then 2013 we crushed them, but we haven't seen them since then, which I didn't even realize it. It's been since 13 since we played those guys, and none of these kids had played them. And West Lafayette is a place where personally I lost in 2004 as a player, then 2011 as a coach, and it's just a weird place. Like, it's a little dumpy kind of stadium. This got the worst locker room in America. You don't think Purdue's very good. You think they're just kind of like this, campy team, but they've got ballers. They've always had super talented guys that they would get, and now that they've got an elite coach, it showed up last night. Their skill guys are incredible. It's just one of those things where, all of the things that we've been dodging bullets for, like, against, the Minnesotas and some of the other schools, like, it came to fruition last night. And, it was a painful lesson. It's probably the worst loss that Coach Meyer's had as an Ohio State head coach, just because, this is a team that had lost to Eastern Michigan earlier in the year. This isn't, Iowa was terrible, obviously, but, this is a team that, again, they lost to a MAC score earlier in the year. And it was, I don't know. It's just tough because we don't, the fact that we can't average, 3 yards a carry against, Purdue is scary because, we got Michigan coming down the pike, and they have, the best defense maybe outside of Alabama in the country. And, our guys are going to have to, gas it up a little bit. And it's even worse because we have this bye week now. So these guys are going to have, 12 days for it to stew before we play our next game. And I don't know. You worry about the focus, you worry about the leadership, but things are going to have to change. I mean, it's, the rubber's hitting the road, and, it's not too late to win the Big Ten, but, these guys got to get locked in. Stop worrying about the NFL. Stop worrying about where they're going to go on vacation during the bye week. I mean, it's just, there was a clear lack of focus last night.
Ross, I'm going to vent, and I'm going to use this as a type of question to you to swing it, but I'm going to do so I can get this off of my chest. And we're not on Jeopardy, so I don't have to ask this in the form of a question, but you can take it that way anyhow. If somebody had told us with 10 minutes to go in this game that Ohio State would have at that moment in time would have given up 21 points to this Purdue offense, from all of the shrill screams I was hearing all week long about how this Purdue offense is a juggernaut, and don't get me wrong, it is a very good offense, and it obviously gave Ohio State a lot of problems, but if somebody had told us that they would have given up 21 points 50 minutes into the game against Purdue, I think everybody would have been okay with that defensive performance. Not excited about it, it wasn't a great performance, but at that moment in time, Ohio State should have been in the football game, giving up 21 points. And to be fair to the defense, even though they didn't play great, at that moment in time, they were put in a bad spot by the offense and the special teams. That's what irritates me about this performance. I see a lot of people saying, the same old crappy defense. I didn't think the defense was the biggest concern last night. I thought the fact that Ohio State had, at that time, 2 field goals against this Purdue defense, that was the problem. I mean, you look at, 12, 13 penalties that they had, all the special teams blunders, the missed field goals, a couple, bad or so-so punts, the, fourth down fake field goal conversion that Purdue had. You just put everything, and I'm not saying the defense played well. They did not. They were part of the problem too, but there is just so much to take away from this on Saturday night that I think should be of equal concern to Ohio State fans than just boiling this down to giving up 49 points. What do you think?
I absolutely agree. I think it's all relative to expectations, right? So the defense going into it, Purdue had a good offense. They were top 20 in S&P plus. And so for them to hold them, especially in the positions they were in most of the game, that was frankly exceeded my expectations. Conversely, Purdue's defense was terrible. I mean, they were 90th in S&P plus. So to get 6 points was just atrocious. But I mean, I think that it's all, I think it really was a pretty straightforward explanation for the game. I think Bill Conley, who does the S&P plus rankings, had an article right after the game where on an average game, Ohio State should have been up 9 or 10 points entering the fourth quarter, just given the number of scoring opportunities they created relative to Purdue. So to go inside the 10-yard line 4 times and get 6 points, I mean, it's really hard to be that bad in the red zone. And then you add that together with some of the, as you mentioned, the fake field goal. I would put the Devon Hamilton roughing the punter as maybe the worst penalty I've ever seen in my life, given that Ohio State was in punt safe. They had their base defense on the field. There was zero reason to be getting near that punter. Things like that. That's going to get you beat on the road.
Kirk, we've been hypersensitive now to watching Ohio State's offensive line, and I know some of the problems have been the numbers, but there's just no excuse for Ohio State. I mean, they're whipping. I mean, I've seen a couple times Demetrius Knox, and I know you guys had a replay, a particular play floating around when we were texting about this, but I saw a couple times that Demetrius Knox got whipped up front, at the very point of attack. This offensive line is just not getting it done. Another 3 yards per carry against the defense, as Ross mentioned, is at best being very conservative and very generous. Probably not even a top 75 defense, and so 3 yards a carry just doesn't cut it for this Ohio State team, and there's just no signs of it getting better with a couple of really good rush defenses coming up later in the schedule with Michigan State and Michigan, who I keep telling people, by the way, the Michigan defense is the best defense in the country. Don't at me. Actually, you can at me at KYLam8 on Twitter. But, Kirk, I'm speechless.
We're not counting Alabama, right?
I think Michigan's defense. I think Michigan's defense is performing better than Alabama. I actually do.
Well,
we can have that discussion another.
I watch Bama every week, and I'm like, oh my god. Like, I mean, if we got to block Raekwon Davis and some of those Isaiah Buggs, I was like, that could get really nasty.
Well, if we're talking NFL talent, then Alabama's probably going to have more NFL success. But I think right now Michigan's defense is performing better as a unit. But that's
they are out of this world good, and it's it's the fruition. I mean, even it'll be real interesting to see if Rashawn Gary decides to come back out. But honestly, I don't know who the leader is of that room. Like, I know who has the title of captain, but I love Isaiah, so it's really hard for me to ever be critical of any of these guys. But, if you're the captain, like the biggest thing about like being a leader is, well, for one, you can't ever like say I'm a leader or I'm tough. Like, anytime you have to tell somebody that you are something, you're not that. Like, I don't like if I walk out and say, oh, I'm tough, or oh, I'm a great leader, or whatever. Like, people either can sense it or they can't. And guys, the best way to be a great leader is you got to play lights out. I mean, you got to be the guy that everyone points to as like, yeah, when we snap the ball, I mean, that he is going to be on his shit and he's going to be good. He's not, like the pre-snap penalties are just like mind blowing. And then it's, we're getting holds and, we're not performing, we're giving up sacks, we're getting beaten pass rush. We're not, sustaining and run blocking. And it's, and again, we're not playing Clemson. We're playing Purdue. But the thing I always tell these guys, I'm like, look, man, those guys from Purdue want to go to the league. And guess what? And I said this last week. I said it like 14 minutes into last week. I was like, these guys at Purdue know that when scouts turn on the tape, they're going to watch the Michigan game and the Ohio State game. That's it. So, yeah, Lorenzo Neal had the game of his life, and he was whipping us up front. And then, the linebacker that we didn't recruit. I mean, that guy's got a hard-on a mile long for Ohio State because guess what? We didn't think he was good enough to play. And he grew up probably wearing a James Lawrence jersey. And then all of a sudden, he ends up at Purdue, and he's like, oh, okay, yeah, you took all these kids from Texas and Georgia and Florida that run faster and, they look better in shorts than I do at combines, but, I'm going to put it to you. I mean, that kid's probably going to be all Big Ten. He played great, and then he has a pick six as an exclamation point. And, I worry about where our head's at. And, I was like, when I was a captain, it was tough because we're coming off the Florida loss, and all my best friends had left, like, Anthony Gonzalez, Ted Ginn, Troy Smith, and we were picked third in the Big Ten. And, and honestly, my O-line my senior year, I was the only guy that got drafted. We had 4 guys that didn't get drafted, and it was, it was tough. I mean, and sometimes, like, I tell people, like, when you've got cupcakes, the only way you can make a cupcake any good is with a lot of heat, because if you don't put a lot of heat on a cupcake, then it's just a big bowl of sludge, so sometimes, you're not going to be popular, but I never cared about being popular. I just wanted to be good. So I always think that being a captain, people say being a captain is the greatest honor at Ohio State, and I think that's a complete joke. I think that I'd rather be a first-team All-American than a captain any days, because that's merit. It's not a popularity contest. It's not a sorority rush. I mean, it's literally like, if you're a really good player, you're a first-team All-American. If you're a captain, people might just like you, but that doesn't mean that you're going to perform. I mean, because I played with some captains that I wouldn't let clean the rims on my truck, let alone ever lead anything of note. So that's my piece on that. I'll let Ross, hopefully Ross is in a quiet area. He's not at the petting zoo anymore. We can get Ross's take on some stuff.
Yeah, Kirk.
Love you, Ross.
Before I swing this to Ross, because I have kind of a follow-up to that I want to ask. Kirk, I think you hit the nail on the head for me, because I think the problem I see with this team is that it lacks a number of, not that there aren't any of these guys on the team, but it lacks the number of true football players that they've had in the past. The guys that have the instincts, that have the feel for the game, like on defense, the ball hawking, and you can see the guys that just trust their instincts and are in the right place at the right time and always making plays. And it's not just a defensive problem, as I said. I think it lacks those guys on offense to some degree as well. I think Mike Weber and J.K. Dobbins right now are just we've seen they're talented, so this shouldn't be a reason. But I mean, they're missing some holes in some cases. I mean, not that the holes are there a lot, because the offensive line definitely isn't blocking well, and they don't have the numbers, but they are missing some holes as well. Ross, so here's what perplexes me about this. You look at first blush, 49 of 73 passing for Dwayne Haskins, both school records, 470 yards, school record. At first blush, Ohio State winds up putting up 550 yards, and you think all is well with the offense. But when you watch it, obviously that's not the case. As we said, 6 points, 50 minutes into the game against a bad Purdue defense. But here's what's really strange. It's not strange. It's understandable. But I watch the play calling, especially inside the red zone, and I see a team and a coaching staff that doesn't know what this team is as far as an identity. You can see in the play calling that the lack of a run game is hurting them, and they don't know how to compensate for it. I mean, like Ross, I'm going to pick this play out. They were inside the 10-yard line. One of those, I think it was that first possession in the third quarter, I can't remember. And then they do that little, it was a little flat pass where Mike Weber was jogging out to the sideline, and Haskins throws it to him, and he has his back turned to the goal line at the 6-yard line, and they expect him to catch the ball and then turn upfield, and that just seems like a play that is doomed to fail from the very start. Not many guys are going to get the corner turned and get to the end zone, and that's the kind of play that shows me they have no trust and no idea what they're doing as far as an identity. What do you think is the answer, or is there an answer right now? Because clearly they don't have it.
I think part of it, this falls on the off season, because that's when you really have to prepare. And you knew for 7 months that you were going to have a quarterback who's not mobile. And rather than try to fit the square peg in the round hole, you could have spent that time adapting a little bit more. But now they're sort of in the midst of it, and it's a little too late. And so, I actually think I saw Kirk say this as well, like, there were opportunities to establish the run last night, especially in the first half, and they just didn't do it. I mean, there were holes there. There were the numbers were there to run the football, and they should have stuck with it, because then they were just kind of up against it, especially because, like, you can be a good throwing team, but, like, when it comes down to it, you better be able to throw in the red zone. And, like, they're just not quite accurate enough. Wide receivers keep dropping the ball in the red zone. And so, if you're not going to be good enough throwing, then you better be able to run it.
I mean, is that a confidence issue? I mean, would you say that it shows the coaches do not believe in the run game right now? I mean, if there were opportunities and they're not doing it, are they just so? Are they in a comfort zone with this short passing game? Because Ohio State, this is crazy to say, but Ohio State is one of the leaders in the entire country in percentage of throws under 10 yards. I mean, they've got this big-armed quarterback that can throw the ball downfield, that can put the ball in tight windows, but they're not really doing that very much. I mean, like, more than any other team in the country, they're throwing mostly under 10-yard routes, which is just crazy. So they're not even confident in the ability that they have and the guy that they have, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, I think they are responding to what defenses are doing, which for years defenses have dared them to throw those short passes. And so they're doing it, and they're moving the football. The problem is, I guess, if there was an easy answer to the run game situation at this point, obviously they would do it. I still think that there are holes there. I think it's not only on the offensive line. I would like to see, I can't remember the last time J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber broke a tackle. Someone, at times, to Kurt's point about being a leader, like, sometimes when things aren't going well, someone just needs to step up and make a play. And you'd like to see someone just break a run. I think that would take a lot of pressure off people. But, like, again, they move the football. So it's really just all comes down to around the goal line. Like, I don't know if people are pressing, if receivers are dropping them because they're pressing. Obviously, the coverage is a little tighter. The windows are a little tighter. But, I think it may be at a point where they sort of have to take their medicine and accept that they may not move the ball as well for a quarter or a half. And, this goes against mostly what I would always say, but sort of take their lumps and run until you sort of establish some sort of toughness and get the running game going.
Well, this week we know there will not be any opponent to stop the running game, so I would say this is going to be a focus in practice. But Nebraska's not shutting down the run much either, so I would say Nebraska is a perfect opportunity next week to try that, because they've got to get that going here before those last couple games of the season. Defensively, Kirk, I want to ask you about this, because we're seeing so many plays where a linebacker comes up in those inside runs to fill, and they're some people would say over pursuing. I actually don't think it's over pursuing. I think in some cases just because the positioning of the linebackers is putting them in a bad spot. But you see a linebacker, we saw it twice in a row, like there in the fourth quarter, where I think Pete Werner came up and was trying to guess the hole that the running back was hit, and then we see a cutback, and then you get a big run. To me, that tells me, we're seeing this a lot. So, people have been complaining about the linebacker positioning, and we're also seeing these gaps not be filled, which means it tells me that the defensive line is not getting off blocks very well either. What's your assessment of that, and why we're seeing this so frequently here this year?
I mean, I think part of it is, and this might be rudimentary, but, we're not a running team on offense anymore. So, when we scrimmage and when we were really good, my senior year, we were the number one defense statistically in the country, but we were a running football team. We had Beanie Wells, we had Todd Beckman, who he was a good player, but he wasn't a great thrower. And, we kind of had to cover that up. And it's just, that's a lot of stuff you get in practice. I mean, you get it in preseason camp, when you're scrimmaging against each other and, they know that we can really run the ball and we can block it and we're not scared. And, and I don't think it's for a lack of attempts, because I literally have been looking at stats while Ross is talking. This is a real interesting one. So Wisconsin has 316 attempts. Now, mind you, they've already played Michigan, which is probably the best rush defense in the country. We have 315 attempts. So we literally have one fewer attempt rushing the ball than Wisconsin. And Wisconsin has a statue for quarterback too. They have 600 more yards rushing than we do, which is granted, I know their running back is a first-round pick, but J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber are talented guys. And that was it was shocking to me. And I feel like our lack of physicality on defense is in direct correlation to the fact that we've turned into Texas Tech on offense, and it's something that, I don't know how else to say it. And honestly, the running game, when your defense is struggling, the running game is your best friend in the universe. Because, Michigan leads the Big Ten in rushing attempts. They have 337. And again, they don't have a running quarterback. Now, Shea Patterson can scramble better than most. But, when your defense is struggling, my high school, we were in the wing T. We beat Canton McKinley. We're a Division II team that's out of the playoff race right now. We beat the number 2 team in Division I because we run the ball. We ran for 370 yards. We milked the clock. And if your defense is struggling, get them off the damn field. Because when we do, 3 passes in a row, or 1 run and then 2 passes, or, and we're just we're not physical. And, I'm just concerned about our lack of physicality and our lack of wearing out the opposing defensive front. Because that was something I talked about last week, because I'm like, look, every lineman in the world likes to run block. None of us like to pass block, because pass blocking is passive. You're going against a good athlete who can beat you, and it's great with a kid like Dwayne, but, sometimes a 2-yard gain on running isn't bad, because you're knocking the D lineman back. You're getting physical on him, and that wears him out by the end of the game. It's I never, obviously you want it, every run you want it to be 6, 7, or 30 yards, but it's like the cumulative trauma that can build up by the end of the game of just wearing a guy out. Whereas, and we're just pass blocking the whole time, it's not violent towards the defensive lineman the way that run blocking is. And I don't know, I don't get paid to coach anymore, so I have my opinions, but I feel like our lack of ability to stop the run versus good teams is in direct correlation with the fact that we don't really run the ball anymore. I mean, it's, because you go against that in practice. We'll go good on good in practice, and you do it all in training camp. And, the years I felt like we were really good against the run, we would go 1s versus 1s and inside run, and we'd have some tough battles. And that's how, we get good at run blocking, and they get good at stopping the run, and their fits. And this is not something that's, I guess, our identity anymore.
That is interesting, because we did talk last week about, I asked you that question, can the lack of a consistent run game affect the offensive line and their mentality and their psyche. And we never looked at it from the other side, but that is an interesting point. Maybe that lack of run game is not only affecting the offensive line, but affecting the defensive line and the linebackers as well. Because it's, I would never worry about, you watching an Ohio State game, you'd never worry about a team running the ball consistently on Ohio State in the fourth quarter. That's just never something that Ohio State fans have ever been ingrained to worry about. And when
our rush defense has always been top 5 to 10 in the country. I mean, this is how it's been. And, I feel like when we were more physical, like when we had Ezekiel and we had Pat Elflein and Billy Price, and we had these kids that, they ate their opponents' faces. That was kind of our identity. I mean, we were tough against the run in 14. I mean, this is just how we were.
So Ross, I'm getting this question a lot, and I want you to answer this because I'm getting this question, and this is kind of to appease people that are asking this. What is the reasoning? And I know you've touched on it before in a few weeks ago, but we'll hit it again just because it's such a topic. What is the reasoning for the positioning of the linebackers? Because so many people are noticing there's not the inside linebackers has been offset so often this year and closer to the line of scrimmage. And I know you've talked that's an RPO and zone read type thing, but we're not seeing that traditional inside linebacker right in the middle. And that seems to be where they're getting burnt on this, where a linebacker has to come from the side and at an angle, and they're missing. So what is the reasoning for that, and what's the cause of these plays in your estimation?
So there's two separate situations that we have to distinguish a little bit. So the first one is during a rundown where they have the front side linebacker, the guy away from the running back. So on that one big run, that was Tough Borland up on the line of scrimmage. And as you alluded to, you're basically trying to cancel out all the front side gaps to prevent double teams. That's the theory. You see the problem with it on that one run because it basically leaves it down to one linebacker to make the tackle. And that obviously, if he overruns the player, gets blocked, guy can be gone. So it pretty much negates any sort of team defense. The other one, and this was the first Purdue touchdown run. I actually said before the play, this is going to be a run because it was like 3rd and 8. Purdue was in plus down territory. And Ohio State's in that nickel defense, which is the easiest thing in the world to run on because it's very gap unsound on that run play. Purdue ran a trap, and Ohio State had no one in either A gap. So it was like 8-on-6, and it was, that was like partying to the sea because there's just no one there. So in that situation, they put the linebackers up to sort of show blitz, fake blitz, try to mess with the offense. I got to say it hasn't been particularly effective at freeing up rushers, but that's what they're doing with that one.
So do you think that was a called run and they just got lucky, or do you think that they saw that at the line of scrimmage and maybe changed into that play because of the look that Ohio State was giving?
That's a good question. They did. I think it may have been a change because they brought the tight end back in, but it made total sense to run there either way because, as I said, they were in plus territory. So even if they'd gotten a 4-yard gain, it was 4th and 4 on the Ohio State 40, and they could have gone for it. So that's what Minnesota did too, is they ran it a bunch in 3rd and long and picked up 15 yards a pop because it's just Ohio State's in cover 1 with 6 guys and the linebackers are running around trying to show blitz, and there's just no one. It's basically just unsound gap football.
So I want a couple big picture questions here before we wrap it up. First, let's start with this season, and then I've got a even bigger picture beyond. Kirk, this season, do you think this Ohio State team has what it takes? Can it get it together and finish out the season? Because I know people don't want to hear this, and we're not going to spend time talking about it. But Ohio State does still control its own destiny. Ross said this on Twitter, and I completely agree with him. Technically speaking, this game doesn't really change Ohio State's season goals any. They can still win out, get to the Big Ten title game, win the Big Ten, and if they do, they're going to get in the college football playoff because you end the season with wins against Michigan State, Michigan, and even Wisconsin. Despite the fact Michigan State and Wisconsin are down a little bit from what we thought at the beginning of the year, that's still going to be enough to get them in the playoff. But I know people don't want to talk about that because this team right now is not ready to be talking about the playoff. But is it good enough to win out and get itself back in that situation? Do you think it has what it takes as far as mentality, talent level, skill, all that? I mean, I guess skill is a bad way to ask that question because I think we know that. But do you think it has what it takes to get in that position, Kirk?
I mean, I think we do just because of our talent level. But, I'm not sure who our leaders are right now. Obviously your quarterback's going to be a leader, but Dwayne's so young. He's a redshirt sophomore, and I don't know. And, it's one of those things where, we have the talent, but, these guys better buckle up and get ready for Michigan. I mean, I've been worried about this Michigan game since Shea Patterson was announced eligible because I'm like, he's a legit quarterback. They've got, Trey Black. They're getting healthy. They got Trey Black. They've got Peoples-Jones. I mean, I think we do, but, I've been saying for weeks, I'm like, I'm glad that we're not in the SEC. I'm glad we don't have to play LSU and Georgia and Bama and teams that can actually expose us. And because I was like, if there's ever a team with skill that actually can beat us, I mean, it happened last night, but if we had to like guard T. Higgins or Jerry Jeudy right now, I'd be scared to death, just because we're not where we need to be. And it's up to these guys. I mean, do these guys want to, keep stunting for the gram, or do they want to start, playing football? Do they want to play tough and get more committed, or do they just want to worry about where they're going to go on vacation for the bye week? I mean, it's up to these guys. I mean, there's nothing we can do or say, and the coaches can only do so much. At the end of the day, it's the players. Players got to play. It's like we can blame the coaches for whatever, but players make plays. It's always been that way, and I always, even when I was a captain and we lost to Illinois in 2007, I mean, I was a raving lunatic leading up to that Michigan game because we played Michigan the next week, and I mean that Illinois team was pretty. I mean, they're obscenely talented. I mean, they had Vontae Davis and Mendenhall, and I mean they had like legit players. I mean, they had a bunch of guys on their defense that played in the NFL, which was shot. That's not a typical Illinois team, but their tight end's still playing. I mean, we choked it up and we sucked, and it was one of those things in 2007 you could kind of see it coming because we just never really got to the point where we were great. I mean, we struggled with MAC teams, and we didn't play great against Michigan State. We almost lost that game, and it finally came to fruition against Illinois, and then we were able to rally and beat Michigan and whatever. But this team's got to figure it out, because we can't keep walking into fist fights because that's what we keep doing. And you play a Minnesota team that was tough, then you play Purdue, who obviously waxed us last night. A Purdue team that lost to Eastern Michigan, hung a ton of points on us. I mean, I don't know. The guys got to figure it out. They're going to look in the mirror and decide if they want to go to the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl, that's fine. But it's up to them.
Somebody asked me on Twitter, and this was before the game, but they asked me, when we were having the Michigan discussion, did I think Michigan was going to beat Ohio State? And I actually said yes. I think this is the year Michigan gets Ohio State. I think and I said that, of course, like I said, this was before the Purdue game, so I wasn't taking that into account, and it wasn't a hot take. I actually said that before. And I said so because I think, number one, I just think sooner or later Michigan's going to win this game in this series. It's got to happen at some point, and I think this Michigan team is really good, and I think this is the year that Michigan wins. Now, I'm not going to take that to the bank. I wouldn't be shocked if Ohio State wins. But where I'm going with this, Ross, is last year against Iowa, Ohio State was in a very similar situation, and they were able to bounce back and come back and clobber Michigan State the week after. Now, they've got a bye week this week, or as Ralph Russo of the AP would say, an open date. But then they come back with Nebraska, who finally got its first win of the season. So we know last year that Ohio State had the toughness and the leadership to bounce back from a loss like this. Ross, do you think that this team has that kind of leadership? Kirk was mentioning he hasn't seen it so far, and I agree with him. I think we're seeing a lack of leadership and a lack of guys that have that tough mental fortitude. Do you think it exists there in the locker room that they can bounce back and right the ship here down the stretch?
It's a great question. I mean, they are, as to Kirk's point, I mean, they are really young, especially on defense. And I'm frankly just not sure they're talented enough on defense with all the injuries they've had, given the inexperience in youth. I mean, he's gotten picked on a lot, but that Isaiah Pryor tackle attempt in the fourth quarter was maybe the worst tackle attempt I've ever seen in a major college football game. It just kind of looked like guys were quitting. So maybe that goes to the toughness point. But, I think offensively, I think they're closer. I mean, that obviously was an explosion of their run problems. I really still do think they can run the football if they kind of reset. And, if Brandon Bowen came back at guard, that would certainly help healthy. Defensively, I just don't know. I mean, I would like to see what would happen, I guess, if they could play one game of base defense, even if they want to play cover one man base defense and let the linebackers read and react. I thought actually they started out yesterday's game playing a lot more base defense. They were playing some quarters. They were playing some cover two. And, guys were playing pretty well. And I could just see it slowly as the game went on. They were getting frustrated that they weren't getting more pressure. And they started dialing up the blitzes. And that's when things started really breaking down. So that's a long-winded answer, all of which to say is, I don't know. I agree right now that Michigan is a more sound team just because they can count on their defense. And, with now using Patterson in the zone read schemes, the 11-on-11 changes things on offense. But, you're never as bad as your worst performance. And after Iowa, Ohio State bounced back. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility.
So last question here for both of you, and I'll start with Kirk. I see a lot of people on Twitter last night, and this is somewhat a hot take and somewhat emotional, and I get it. I understand why people are saying this. But they're looking at the last couple of years, and they're seeing games like this as a trend. And I think there's a concern that Ohio State's program is losing its toughness or luster, whatever the will to win these type of games and avoid these kind of losses. So, Kirk, here's the question I have. Do you see Ohio State in this tenure winning another title? Do you think that the program is fine, it'll regroup, the talent level will eventually win out, and they'll get back to where Ohio State should be, in terms of leadership toughness and just pulling games out like this and not losing them? Do you see them winning a title and everything being okay? And I'm not saying I don't think Urban Meyer changed. I think Urban Meyer is still the coach he's always been. Although I do wonder if maybe he's gotten a little softer in how he handles his coaches and his team, but he didn't learn. He didn't stop learning how to coach. So I'm curious what you think about this, Kirk.
I think that we potentially can win the title. I mean, obviously Bama. The hard part is Bama is such an outlier compared to everyone else. I mean, they're just dumb good every year. So it's like we always want to compare ourselves to. Yeah, it's like comparing yourself to like Mark Zuckerberg when you're like 25 years old and you're like, oh, well, he was worth $8 billion and I'm, schlepping along, trying to make ends meet. I mean, you can't compare yourself to Bama. But my thing is like, I hate to sound like an old fart, but I'm like, I was worried about the Iowa game last year and the Purdue game this year because we had a group of players and a group of coaches that had never been there. I mean, Urban had never been to Kinnick, and he was at West Lafayette in 13 when they were terrible. But like, these players, they just don't, they've never been through, I guess, like what I like to call the shit, which, this is a whatever podcast, but like they hadn't been through that. Like in 04, like the thing that forged us in 05, 6, and 7 when we were pretty good and we won outright Big Ten titles was 04, we lost 4 games and we sucked. And we got our asses kicked at Purdue, and we got our asses kicked at Iowa. We lost 31-7 at Iowa, and it was like we were 3-3. And then it's like the 2012 team that Urban inherited. I mean, he got a bunch of kids that lost 7 games the year before. So those kids had to go through some shit now, and it's like when you got a bunch of kids that have just been kind of riding the wave of JT Barrett and Billy Price and Ezekiel and kids that have a bunch of rings and they haven't really done shit, and all of a sudden they got to play. It's just different. It's just one of those things where, you got to go through some stuff. Like Urban was lucky as shit because he was lucky because he inherited Braxton Miller, who went through his lumps as a freshman, and we were the worst passing team in America because we had a bunch of freshmen and we had a bunch of young guys out there, and we had a receivers coach who'd never coached receivers in his life, so we couldn't throw the ball. Then Urban inherits a bunch of kids that had 7 losses, and they had to buy into his culture. I had kids that were trying to fight back and say, "Oh, we won the Sugar Bowl 2 years ago." I'm like, "Well, yeah, you guys lost 7 games last year. You guys can't say shit." So if Urban tells you to jump off Mortal Tower, then you're going to jump off Mortal Tower. I don't care. I'm not going to defend you guys. So, it's just that, we had that intensity to right the ship. Like I had And I had kids that were killers on the O line. Like I had Andrew Norwell, I had Jack Mewhort, I had Corey Lindsley. Like I had kids that, I mean, those are nasty kids. I mean, they're tough kids, and it's like they had a certain culture about them. And the whole reason Urban always says an O-line driven program is because we had to change the culture of that room because we sucked. I mean, 2011 we were a pile of garbage, and it's like all of a sudden, we're like we're not going to stand for that shit anymore. All of a sudden we change it, and Jack was a leader, and and we set the tone for the whole team. And then I looked at how we could run the ball. It was because we were nasty and we came off the rock, and we believed in it. We believed in running tight zone. We believed in being the best combination blocking team in America. And I put in an absolute shit ton of hours as a GA to make sure that our line wouldn't suck again. Because if there's one thing I do know, and I don't know much in life, but I know that I don't want to be the shitty position group that Urban Meyer is going to be, all over all the time. Because when you're that group, and that's probably right now the linebackers, the secondary, the O-line right now, I mean, that is the worst place in the entire universe than to be in the Urban Meyer's crosshair. So, Ed Warner and I were determined to not be in the damn crosshairs. So it was like one of those things where we put in a ton of work, and we had kids that were prideful, and and they were just tough kids. I mean, they weren't about all they were about was ball, and they wanted to be great, and they're mostly still getting paid. I mean, Jack's knees gave out on him, so he's done, but Corey Lindsey's getting paid. Taylor Decker's going to be making $80 million when he goes up. Norwell was the highest paid guard in the NFL. I mean, it's about a mentality, and I just worry that say less and do more. Like time for talking and all that bullshit's over. Like all the I just it's about time to start grinding and stop worrying about your future. Don't worry about the NFL. Don't worry about is this kid going to beat me out next year, or am I ever going to play? And honestly, like, if I'm some of those young guys that are on the bench, that are like the young guards that we have that are heralded kids, I'm trying to take a spot right now. Cause like, good God, like you're telling me that you wouldn't be starving to get on the field right now when you see the guy in front of you, isn't performing. Like I'd be a psychopath trying to get on the field. Cause I was like that my redshirt freshman year when I got beat out by Tim Schafer, and I was like, there's no fucking way. And I was a psycho. I was just like, because all I wanted to do was play ball. It's all I cared about. It wasn't social media. It wasn't chasing girls. It was just ball. And it was grind until you get what you want. So,
Ross,
that's my piece.
So I want to, before I swing this question to you, Kirk made an interesting thing talking about Alabama, and like, I hate, always comparing Ohio State to Alabama, but the reality is because Alabama is on that level right now, that is the team that Ohio State has to compare itself to. And an interesting stat about this is Alabama has only gone undefeated 2 times in the past 10 years. So even Alabama is prone to a loss. It's just really difficult to run the table. So if you look at just losses in a vacuum, losing at Iowa or losing at Purdue isn't in itself really that big of a deal. Not as much as Ohio State fans will probably make it out to be. The problem is losing 55-28 at Iowa, losing 49-20 at Purdue. Those are the games that you don't see Alabama lose. When they lose, it's a close game, and it's just a team just naturally winning the game, but they don't go and lay eggs like this. And I think that is the problem for me, is it's not so much the losses, it's how they're losing these games, which is why I wonder, what is causing this. And so I guess, Ross, that's my segue to asking you, do you think that this program has what it takes to get it back on track? Do you think that they've still got those horses that Urban has had in the past? Does he have that drive to keep everyone at their best and come back and this program, maybe it's not this year, but do they have what it takes to get back and win that title here in the future?
I think we have to start with the baseline of how high we're setting the baseline, because we're talking about winning another title the next decade. Ohio State went 40 years without winning a national title. So that's a pretty rarefied era. As Kirk said, I mean, if you're comparing it to what Alabama's doing, maybe it's probably unparalleled in the history of college football. Maybe Oklahoma in the 1950s is the only comparison. So we're talking at a pretty high level. I go back to Kirk's part about the offensive line, and he said it. And what I wanted to say is all those guys except for Mewhort are still playing in the NFL. And we could talk about toughness, but I'm not certain that I mean, Mike Jordan will play in the NFL, but he's playing out of position right now. Thayer Munford, may eventually, but he's obviously his second year playing. So, if you want to compare it to 2014, where Ohio State had Ezekiel Elliott and Joey Bosa, who were both top 5 picks. I mean, Ohio State basically had an NFL starter at every position on that team, but for quarterback. And Cardell Jones played at his max of his potential for a 3-game run. And even then, they may still have not been better than Alabama. They just maybe got Alabama that day. So it's obviously a very high threshold that they have to meet. But, at a baseline, again, I'd like to see, I don't think this season's over. I mean, yes, it was a bad loss, but if they had lost like that to Iowa last year and that was their only loss, they were still going to get into the college football playoff, to your point. So, again, you're never as bad. I'd like to see a little bit more fundamental play. The toughness part is obviously part of that, but I'd like to see, again, someone, make a block, break a tackle when they have to. Someone's got to sort of put it on their back and take over. And maybe that's just there's just too much youth at too many spots.
Well, that's the good news. Like I said earlier, and Ross said this on Twitter, the season goals are not over for Ohio State. This actually doesn't change the season complexion any. It may change your confidence level and their ability to beat Michigan State or Michigan or win the Big Ten title. But if they do those things, they're still getting to the college football playoff, and then all bets, everything is still on the table at that point. So Ohio State's season is definitely not over with, but this obviously is not good for the confidence level going forward. So I do want a quick programming reminder. So Friday, I will be joined by Johnny Lunsford and Corey Thompson. They host the Scarlet and Great podcast. We're going to have a little bye-week roundtable. If you've got the bye-week blues or the, I guess now, open date depression, we're going to try to cure them with a little episode we call Fanfare for the Common Fan. If you're an Office fan, kind of reminds me of, fanfare for fanfare's sake. So we'll probably be uncensored when it comes to that podcast, but that should be a lot of fun. So I do want to tease that. And, of course, you can catch the podcast here every Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com, on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. Guys, I appreciate you taking the time to do this little post-mortem. Obviously, nobody wants to be in the situation, but we made the most of it. So thanks, guys, for the chat, and I guess we'll probably be back here maybe in not next week since we won't have a game to talk about, but the week after. So appreciate it, fellas. So that will wrap it up. Thanks again to Kirk and Ross. You can catch them on Twitter at Ross R. Fulton and at Kirk_Barton, respectively. Of course, you can catch me on Twitter at KYLam8. Please, again, tune in on Friday as we are back on our same bat time, same bat channel. You can catch us on Buckeye Grove, iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Stitcher, your medium of choice. We'll be back on Friday, as I said, with Corey and Johnny of the Scarlet and Great podcast. Should be a lot of fun as we kind of look at this from a fan's point of view, put our fan lenses on, and digest what happened over the weekend and look ahead with this Ohio State program. So that'll be a lot of fun. Our fanfare for the Common Fan episode, crossover with the guys from Scarlet and Great podcast. Very much looking forward to it. Anyhow, we will be back on Friday, everybody. Hope you have a great week. Go Bucks.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.